Well, friends, welcome back to Rise and Shine, the daily Bible study that is intended to inspire you, intended to instruct you, and impact your life in ways that you never imagined possible. Thanks for joining us again today. We're going through the Gospel of Matthew. Gospel comes right from the Greek word euangelion, which means a joyful, positive proclamation of life change. And it's the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's the message about Jesus, about his life and mission and ministry that is changing and has changed and will continue to change the world as we know it. We find ourselves now in the midst of a great pandemic, a world-changing event that we've never experienced in my lifetime, but it pales in comparison to the difference and the impact that Jesus' life has made around the globe and will continue to make in your life for the rest of your life. So today we're jumping into Matthew chapter 14. We've kind of been going through a series of events that are happening. We're coming now out of chapter 13, which is really for Matthew the beginning of the parables of Jesus. Jesus talking about what the kingdom will look like, what it'll mean, and how it'll impact the world around him. Jesus has begun to develop a following. Certainly people are following him wherever he goes. And that is drawing the anxiety or the angst of the Pharisees, the religious rulers that are trying to maintain order and structure in this world of occupation. They are under occupation from the Romans. And so now we come to chapter 14 and really now begins to take on a different change. You begin to see not only the anxiety and the battle that is waging, but you now begin to see it take on a whole different meaning, a whole different level of violence as we jump into chapter 14. And chapter 14 also then begins to balance whether you understand what Jesus is trying to do, the kind of kingdom that he's bringing. Oftentimes what we do is we go through the Gospels and we look at the stories. We look at individual stories and we tear them apart. Last time we looked at the sower and the seed, which is a wonderful parable. It often gets behind our defenses and it helps us to see how faith is something that develops and matures over time, that the faith that you have now will continue to mature with time and eventually to bear fruit. That fruit is something that we talk about and Paul talks about in Galatians, when he talks about the fruit of the Spirit. Paul doesn't talk just about this is what will be given to you, but Paul talks about fruit, and fruit is something that has to develop over time. It has to be nurtured, it has to be cared for, it has to be pruned, but it also has to be fed and watered as well. And so the question for all of us as we think about our own faith journey, about the fruit of the Spirit, peace, gentleness, kindness, long-suffering, all of the fruits that he lays out, are we tending to the garden of our own soul? Are we tending to those values that come with a lifetime of growth and maturity? Okay, well, I can see by the clock on the wall it's time for us to open with prayer. We open each day with a prayer for our church and for its witness. Would you join with me as we begin our time in prayer? Father, I pray that you will bring new life and blessings to Mount Pleasant far beyond anything that we could ask or imagine. Amen. Now, if you've prayed that prayer, I want to ask you, how has God answered that prayer for you? We've been praying for that. We've been asking that God would release his abundance in ways that we could never ask or imagine. And so that means that we have to be prepared. How are we being challenged? How are you being challenged? How are you being invited to do more, to go farther, and to step and rise higher than ever before? We're glad that you're part of this Bible study. Hopefully this is nurturing your soul, but not just for you alone, not just for your own well-being, but for your family and your friends around you. How are you growing? How is this helping you grow the fruit of the Spirit? All right, so let's jump in to chapter 14, beginning with the first verse. Now at that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard the reports about Jesus, and he said to his attendants, "This is John the Baptist. He has risen from the dead. This is why miraculous powers are at work in him." Now Herod had arrested John and bound him and put him in prison because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. For John had been saying to him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." Herod wanted to kill John, but he was afraid of the people because they considered him a prophet. On Herod's birthday, the daughter of Herodias danced for him and pleased Herod so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Prompted by her mother, she said, Give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist." The king was distressed, but because of his oath and his dinner guests, he ordered that her request be granted and had John beheaded in the prison. His head was brought in on a platter and given to the girl, who carried it to her mother. John's disciples came and took his body and buried it. Then they went and told Jesus. When Jesus had heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. And when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came and said to him, "This is a remote place and it's already late. Send the crowds away so that they can go to the village and buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." "We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. "Bring them to me," he said, and he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of them to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves, because the wind was against it. During the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It is a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink and cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down, and those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." When they had crossed over, they landed at the Gennesaret, and the men of the place recognized Jesus. They sent word to all the surrounding country, and people brought all their sick to him and begged him to let the sick touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched him were healed. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Okay, so we start out the story with this interaction with Herod the Tetrarch. Now, upon the death of Herod the Great, who was around when Jesus was born, his kingdom was divided into 4 pieces among his sons. In Judea and Bithynia, down around Jerusalem and Samaria, was given to somebody called Herod Archelaus. North of that, in a northern part, is where Herod Antipas, that's the Galilean region, and the Decapolis region around the Sea of Galilee. That's the one that we're talking about here, Herod Antipas. And then, of course, north of that was Herod Philip, or his son Philip. Now, the story is that Herod Antipas had traveled to Rome, where Philip was, met up with Philip and his wife Herodias, convinced her to leave Herod's brother and come and live with him. So when he comes back with his brother's wife, John the Baptist calls that out. He speaks truth to power. He talks to Herod Antipas about how this is improper, as basically as the authority of the Jews, as leader over the Jews, he's living a sinful life. Now, you can get from the story that Herod Antipas is very sensitive to his public opinion. He takes polls. He finds out what people are thinking. He was afraid of what people would say about him. So not only was he not willing to deal with John the Baptist, what John is saying, he's also afraid because he knows what John is saying is true. And so he's kind of in this problem. And so what we're seeing here is, as Matthew is laying it out, is the leaders of the Jewish people are corrupt. That the leaders of the nation of Israel are completely corrupt. That Herod is living with, or is trying to marry his brother's wife. He is afraid of the people. He is afraid of the truth. He goes along with what everybody wants him to do. And so we have this story that is playing out. It's interesting that in Matthew's writing, he kind of goes back in time. If you remember, he starts out by saying that Jesus is doing all these amazing things, but Herod Antipas believes that it's because it's the resurrected John the Baptist who has come back to seek vengeance upon him for having him beheaded. So Herod Antipas is clearly a very superstitious person. He understands that what he's doing is wrong, and he believes that Jesus is coming back to judge him for what he's been doing. He then goes on to tell the story why he thinks that. Well, there's this whole birthday party scene. Herod holds a birthday party. Herodias has her daughter Salome dance, probably a very provocative dance in order to get such concessions from Herod. Herod, in this grandiose gesture, offers her whatever she wants, and of course, she asks for the head or the murder of this prophet. Now, it's interesting that Herod is deeply distressed, but he's also more afraid of the people than he is of the truth. And we will see that played out later in Matthew's gospel when it comes to Pilate. We see that people know what the truth is, they're just not willing to do it. And so we also see that the leaders of the Jewish people at that time, the Herod that is in charge over the Galilean region, is also very corrupt and gives rise to the murder of this great prophet. We then follow that immediately by the feeding of the 5,000. What's interesting about this story is this is where Jesus now begins to transfer some of his power. And he basically says, okay, they don't have to go find something to eat. Jesus has compassion on them. So they don't need to find something to eat. You give them something to eat. You think it through. What are you going to do? Everybody up until this time is just expecting Jesus is going to take care of all of our problems, right? Don't we all fall into that habit? Jesus, fix this. What are we going to do? We're all in isolation. We're all in quarantine. Jesus, fix this. Do something. He said, I don't need to do something. You do something. What do you think we ought to do? And I said, well, we don't have anything but these 5 loaves and 2 fish. What are we going to do? And Jesus says, okay, bring what you have to me. Bring what little that you have. And so we begin to see the abundance that happens in this process. Jesus multiplies the loaves. We see that by just giving and offering what little we have and trusting that Jesus can do with what we have, instead of just coming to say, hey, look, we're at our wits' end. Calm down, look at what you have around you, see what you have, and do the best that you can, and God will bless what little that you give as long as you are faithful in a little, right? If you're faithful in a little, I will put you over much. The problem is we often get to a place where we're not going to move unless we have a lot. And Jesus says, just your faith in just a little will prove so much more. So the question that I want to offer to you today is ask, what little bit can you do now that will have an abundance in Jesus's hands? What little can you do to encourage somebody, to reach out to somebody, to invite them, I don't know, to a Bible study, to invite them to get involved? What little could you do that would transform somebody's life? Now, as soon as this is over, they go into the boat, and Jesus goes up on the mountain to pray. What's interesting about this is Jesus sends them across the lake while he goes up on the mountain. I wonder what kind of conversation that has. It's like, well, why aren't you coming? How are you going to get there? And it turns out that Jesus comes by walking on the water. Now, this is a story that is repeated in several of the Gospels. Now, what's interesting about this story is it's also recorded in Mark chapter 6, but Mark leaves out the whole passage about Peter trying to get out of the boat. And actually, Mark ties it to the lesson of the loaves. At the very end of Jesus walking on the water, the disciples are terrified. They think it's a ghost. They don't know what's going on. They've never seen this before. It can't be real. And Jesus says, calm down, it's me. And he gets in the boat and everything calms down. Now, Mark says the reason that they were afraid is because they had not learned the lessons of the loaves. Well, of course, that begs the question, what is the lesson of the loaves? What is the lesson that we should have learned from the loaves that we had not learned when we were sitting in the boat, terrified because the sea is rocking and rolling all around us? At the very end, as they come in, they're terrified, but here they declare, truly, you are the Son of God, and they worshiped him. Now, this is wild. This is wild for Jews to have it reported this way, for Jews to worship a man that's in their boat as the Son of Man. So Jesus has calmed the created order. He has walked across the water and come into their boat, and they say, you are the Son of God. They have seen something spectacular. So here we have two stories that deserve some attention. Jesus feeds and nurtures and cares for the 5,000. He takes what little we have, he multiplies it and satisfies our basic human needs. He sees their needs, he gets his disciples involved, and nurtures and cares for us when we're at our wits' end. At the same time, when they're in the middle of the boat and the sea is overwhelming them, they feel that the waves are buffeting, they can't get to the shore, it's pushing them out into deep water. Jesus comes to them. It's the story of Jesus coming to us in our most vulnerable and most difficult times to experience all the grace that he has in store for us. When they get over to the other side, we find that everybody is now aware of who Jesus is. His fame is beginning to develop, so much so that now Jesus doesn't lay his hand. If we can only touch him, we will be healed. We understand that now as the Son of God, as this has been laid out earlier, that he is now the Son of God, and they're worshiping him. If they can only touch his cloak and his garment, they will be healed. What Matthew is doing is he's laying out both the tension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, which is building in energy, as well as his divinity is beginning to come alive. Now Matthew is beginning to promote within us, this is not just a prophet that can do a lot of neat things, much like Elijah or Isaiah would have done. But this is truly the Son of God. Nobody has ever done the things that he has done, had control over the created order, had control over the demons and the spirits of the world, was able to calm our deepest fears. As we kind of get into chapter 15, we're going to go a little bit farther, and we're going to see that Jesus' reach is not just to the Jews, but he's now extending it to the Gentiles. And that is going to be pushing people, some people, just a bit too far. Well, friends, I want to thank you for joining us today. I hope that you're being fed and nurtured in a powerful way. I hope that you feel that in your soul you're getting that shot of caffeine that gives you that healing and that presence that you need. And I hope that deep down inside you feel it welling up, that now is the time to rise and shine, for God is going to be with us. Friends, I hope that you have a great day. I hope to see you tomorrow. Until then, or actually I guess it'll be Monday. Until then, look through the rest of chapter 15, continue studying and continue growing. And I pray that the love of God the Father, the grace of God the Son, and the fellowship of God the Holy Spirit will rest upon you and give you peace. Until then, God bless. Bye-bye.